Hello and welcome to Creative Voices. I'm your host, Joni Wilson, and my guest today is a jack of many trades. He is a professional motivational speaker, a corporate team builder, a public speaking coach, an event entertainer, and underlying all of these, a professional improviser who uses improvisation as the basis for almost all of his work. Milo Shapiro, welcome to Creative Voices.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the real basics. What do you mean by improv or improvisation?
Improv is a kind of theater where everything is being created on the spot, usually based on some ideas from the audience. So we never know, going onto the stage at that point in the show, what we're going to be doing on behalf of the audience.
So it's not like what we've all seen on the show An Evening at the Improv with comedians like George Carlin, Robin Williams, or Chris Rock.
Right. Stand-up comedy is very different from improvisational comedy. And the reason there's a lot of confusion is that show An Evening at the Improv, the name they gave it, where really no improv almost ever takes place. Stand-up comedy takes a lot of preparation, and they try lines all different ways in front of audiences and feel it out until they finally get it just right. With improvisation, we do a scene once, and whether it worked or whether it didn't work, we never do it again. So they're very different that way.
Okay, let's go back. How did you get started in doing improvisation?
When I first moved out to California, I was looking to simply do something, to meet people. So I joined a Toastmasters group and started working on my professional speaking that way. And in that group, I started doing something called Table Topics. Table Topics is speaking extemporaneously, and I found that I was pretty good at it. Then I joined a different Toastmaster club called Laugh Masters. It was like Toastmasters, but with an emphasis on humor. Well, one month, instead of a guest speaker, they had a guest improv troupe come. I'd never heard of an improv troupe before, and I sat there mesmerized watching as they were taking ideas we gave them and creating these really funny little scenes and games out of them. And I was immediately intrigued, so I approached one of them after the show, and I said, how does one learn to do this? And they said, well, we're not really even a troupe. We're really a class that just goes out if we get an opportunity to do a show. You ought to call our teacher. So I called their teacher and joined one of the classes, stayed with her for about a year or two in classes, and eventually auditioned for a troupe, and that troupe led to another troupe, and being in that troupe eventually led to me teaching improv, and that's how the last 10, 12 years of improv have come along.
So during all those years, what were you actually doing for a living? Were you an actor?
No, not at all. I was actually in information technology, computer programming, CICS, COBOL, DB2, a real standard day job. That was how I spent my time when I wasn't doing improv in the evenings.
Well, how did you leave information technology and start a company around improvisation?
What I found was that all of my evenings and my weekends and my vacation I was spending on time related to improv. I was going out of town to study from the masters in Calgary and San Francisco and Edmonton, and all my energy was going there. One day somebody sent me a note, an email saying, hey, check out this website. It was for a company back east that was using improv to teach team building. I thought it was fascinating. But as I read through the thing, I thought, okay, I get why they're doing that. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's not a good exercise for that. They ought to do this. And just sitting at my desk, supposedly doing my work, which any excuse not to do my work was okay with me at my old job, I started coming up with an itinerary for if I ever ran a team building course with improv, what would I do? And I stuck it in a drawer. Well, a couple of years later, they started offering voluntary separation packages after a merger because they were overstaffed. And I looked at the separation package and thought, well, if I'm ever going to have the chance to do this and follow this dream that sounds like a lot of fun, this is my opportunity to. So I took the cash and started my own company.
So you started a company to do team building using improvisation and created a course that you call Team Improvising. Okay.
Right.
So let's say I'm a manager.
Okay.
With all the different kinds of team building out there, why choose a class on improvisation? I can't even say it.
It is a hard word, improvisation. A lot of people blow it. There's all kinds of team building out there, it's true. And I find that they kind of go to two ends of the spectrum. Either it feels like you're being put through some kind of a psychological experiment where you have to solve these problems and do these exercises, and it isn't all that much fun, but you learn some things and it feels very regimented. The other end of the spectrum is where everyone does something that's a lot of fun and they have a great time together and they go, woo, we're a team. And then they go back to the office and they didn't really learn anything they could apply to the job. Hopefully they just like each other a little more. And I found over the last few years that team building has kind of gotten a bad reputation, and deservedly so, because the skill sets don't apply back. Why improv is good is because we learn skills that we can actually apply when we get back to the office the next day.
So, Milo, what are the skills of improvisation that you help relate in team improvising?
One of them is listening skills. In improv, you need to be able to listen carefully and keep track of what other people have said and pay attention in case someone refers to you by a name. So listening skills that we can apply back. Another one, important one, is building on the ideas of others. In improv, it can't always be the idea that you had in mind because other people are saying things you didn't expect, and you can't always fight to go back to the idea you had. You have to build on their ideas. So learning how to build successfully on the ideas of others is really important. We learn about leadership and about letting go of leadership, knowing when it's time to follow along and be support to somebody else. We learn how to approach new ideas with creativity and try things different ways and to let go of having to do things the way you thought maybe it worked before. And finally, we learn about the 5 C's of good teamwork.
The 5, what was that?
The 5 C's of good teamwork.
Okay.
Creativity, cooperation, communication, community, and commitment.
Oh, I like that. The 5 C's of good teamwork.
Right.
Okay, that all sounds really good, but I have to admit that I still don't have much of an idea of what you do at a team improvising class. You aren't throwing people onto a stage to do what they do on, like, whose line is it anyway, are you?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Because even though I've done a lot of stuff with audiences, that would terrify even me.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't do that to someone coming in who'd never done improv before. I really work hard to create a safe environment so that from the time people get there, they're slowly brought along to the point where they start with real easy stuff and build to other little more challenging exercises. One of the things that I would do would be to start with just people working in full groups, everyone participating at once. So there's no stage pressure at all. And even that comes after I've talked to them for a while. Then maybe I'd move them into working in pairs. So that way it's only one-on-one. There isn't that feeling of being up in the group. They might even do some writing exercises as part of it. And eventually I can tell who are the more outgoing people and convince 1 or 2 to come up and try something in front of their group. And then they get big applause. And then maybe 1 or 2 other people are willing to jump up. And little by little, people do let down their guard and they're willing to play in front of each other.
It must have been very different training people being sent to a class by their manager than it would be training people who are actually coming to a troupe because they were motivated to learn improvisation.
Yeah, working with people who are coming to because they want to get on stage is a very different kind of game. And that's why it's so important that I work to create that safe environment. I mean, I wouldn't say, okay, we're going to start the day by learning how to sing songs, made up on the spot. I mean, I would just have everybody staring at me. But there are things that I could do. For instance, I can very early on in the day get them to play a game like 3-word sentences. That would be a good example.
3-word sentences?
Right. It's a game very simply where you have to have a conversation using only 3-word sentences. I'll give you an example. Let's say, Joni, we were doing a scene and you and I were on a blind date. Okay? And so we're having a conversation in this game, but we can only speak in 3-word sentences. So I might say, how's your dinner? And then what's something you could say that would be a 3-word sentence back to me?
It was good.
Good. And I might say, you didn't finish.
I'm very full.
So no dessert?
Don't eat dessert.
So you left the word I off there. Good. So that's one of the things you notice as a skill set.
I did good, huh?
You did good. And there's a 3-word sentence too. So that wasn't very difficult, right?
No.
Okay. And it was probably a bit challenging at first, but then you got the feel for it.
Right, it was fun.
Good. But you didn't have a script for those lines. So you were improvising. I mean, you were asking before, what is improvisation? You were already doing it. Anytime we're speaking without having it prepared for us in advance, that's improvising. You're improvising all the time. Anytime you handle something you haven't done before or talking to someone about a new idea, all we're doing now is putting a word to it, the word improvisation, and acknowledging that there's a skill set to being good at adapting to any new task. And it is a skill set that we can develop. An improv class just happens to be a great environment for doing that.
Do you ever get someone that gets so intimidated that they can't even participate?
I had one woman. This was a group of about 25 people, and it was mostly men. There was only 3 women in the group. And she took me aside and said, "My boss made me come, and the idea of a class built around improvisation is about the scariest thing I can imagine." So I thanked her and said, "We're going to make a deal, you and I. You're going to participate in all the group activities. But if it ever comes to the point where you're too nervous, I'm going to keep an eye on you. When we do the pair exercises, anytime we're going to do that, you're going to be the last pair to go. And if you give me the look that goes, we'll run out of time for that exercise and need to move on to the next one." And about half the time I got the look, and other times she rolled her eyes a little bit and got up there, and she did fine. She actually was as good as anyone else in the class. It was all nerves. That was probably the worst I ever had, and we even worked through it. And afterwards she said, "Thank you. You made me feel safe to know I could always back out if I needed to."
So how about language barriers, Milo? I mean, some of the exercises seem to be about wordplay, but we've got a very diverse workforce these days.
Yes, I know.
So how is the course for them?
I find that some of the exercises, the people who it's not English as a first language for them, they may back off a little bit, but there's other ones where they have a chance to excel. There is a whole bunch of exercises we do around something called gibberish. And gibberish is the opportunity to take English out of the equation completely and use all the other things we have going for us when we communicate. Our body language, our vocal tone, our pitch, the way we look at each other. There's so much that we can use besides English. So in gibberish, we're using sounds that sound kind of like a language from another country, but it's not. So if I were Johnny with you to say, what could you say back in that language?
Schwanka dasa donka vang.
Good, you actually did something I was going to ask you to do.
What was that?
Which was to use one of my words. It sounds very natural when you. So I said the schwanka, and you said schwanka, whatever you said. I don't know what you said.
I have no idea.
But it sounded like you were responding to me. And just across the table here, I was able to see in your face that you looked like you were answering a question I asked you. So that would be part of the nonverbal communication. Well, I had this one woman. She was from Korea. Her name was Cho. And she totally, after being really quiet and participating to the best of her abilities, but quietly the whole day, suddenly came out of her shell when we did the gibberish, and she was all over the place. Because for the first time since coming to work for that company, she was on completely even terms with her English-speaking compatriots. And they were like, "Is that Cho?" And I said, that's Cho when she's no longer being bottled down by the English. That's who she really is. And it was a real awakening for people to see all the energy that she actually had.
I know from looking at your videos on your website that you do use gibberish work in your motivational keynote speech. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is a good time to talk about that.
Sure. During the interactive portion of my keynote speech, I get the whole audience playing several games, including speaking in gibberish with the person next to them. And after sitting and listening all day, especially if it's early in the morning, it really raises the energy in the room when 200 people all at once turn to the person next to them and start going, and they do it all at the same time.
I'll bet. Okay, let's go back first because I'm kind of jumping ahead. How did you go from being an organization team builder to being a public speaker for events and conventions?
Someone that I had done improv with from a different city, we met at an improv convention, found out what I was doing with the team building work, and he said, "You need to get out and speak about this." And I had no idea what he meant by that. I didn't realize that that was sort of a career unto itself. So he was also a professional speaker, or not also, he was and I wasn't yet. And he told me that I needed to look into the National Speakers Association, that they had a program for people who wanted to come up the ranks, an apprentice program. So I checked out my local chapter here in San Diego, started going to meetings, and learned a little bit about what being a keynote speaker was. Well, they were doing a special day where some big speakers were going to be coming, and they needed people in the audience to fill it out. And I was asked, out of the blue, to kick the day off by leading the crowd in some improv games. And I was really surprised they even asked me. I said, "Why are you asking me to do this?" They said, "Well, it's very early in the morning on a Saturday, 7 a.m., and we need the crowd to be lively and alert for the cameras so they'll look good and they'll be energized. So we want the first person on the stage to be you." I was very nervous to do this for an audience of professional speakers, but I said I would do it. I thought it would get them to know my name a little bit. I get there. I come out onto the stage. They're applauding for me. I was all excited. I'd never had an audience applaud for me like that before. And just as I took a breath to start the first thing I wanted to do, a voice rang out from behind me. It was the cameraman, and he yelled out loud enough for the whole room to hear. Remember, everyone, keep your eyes forward the entire time he's on stage. Do not talk in the space of the audience at all. And you, speaker guy, make sure you get them to laugh because I need that on tape. Well, I was there to lead them in games. I had no speech, and I told him that. And he said, well, too bad. That's what I need you to do, so do something else. And I had to switch gears at the last second and make up a little speech. And I made up a speech about what I do with improvisation. Started telling stories, having no idea what stories I was going to tell. And it went really well. People enjoyed it and they laughed, and he got his tape of them laughing. And someone came over and asked me to speak at her Rotary Club 2 weeks later. And that kind of started it. And it started with a little 15-minute speech, and it expanded from there.
And now you speak for an hour or more in your program, You Gotta Fail to Succeed.
Uh-huh.
So tell me about that title, You Gotta Fail. Milo, I don't want to fail.
Well, no one wants to fail. And I'm not saying you should set out intending to fail, but you need to set out intending to know that if you're really doing all that you can, a certain percentage of the time you're going to fail. You're going to need to in order to learn the things you need to. And moving past that fear of failure, not letting it stop you from accomplishing what you want to do is really an important step in the life development of any person, especially if you want to develop that in your employees. It ties in close to improvisation because you can play it really safe and only do the games you know you'll do well, but the show will get stale. So the troupe that I belong to has a theory. We belong to a national organization where the man who started it back in the 60s said, when you do notes after a show, 20% of the scenes should have failed. Not could, up to, should have. Only 80% of the show should have succeeded. Now that might sound crazy, but his theory, and I believe it, is if you're not failing 20% of the time, you're not going out on the edge far enough. You're not taking enough chances to do anything really brilliant for your audience in the other 80%, and you're cheating them. So Teamprovising, the class, has a series of games called failure games built into it, and I used it a little bit in the keynote speaking as well. These are games that I tell people right up front, you cannot succeed at, you will fail. I take all the pressure off them then to succeed. They've been already told they can't succeed at them. So the goal is to see how long do you go before you fail. And when you do, we all applaud for you for trying. So that takes all that pressure off it. When we let go of feeling like we have to be perfect, we open ourselves up to whatever new experiences come along that might allow us to grow. And we move the organizations that we support forward. Otherwise, we're denying them the brilliance that's in every one of us.
I love that idea. Tapping into the brilliance in every one of us.
Right.
That's great. So what's the format for your speech?
Well, the speech starts with several stories. I am there as a keynote speaker, so I tell several stories about taking chances. Stories of me, of people I know, famous people, chances that certain companies took. I like stories better than a lot of facts and figures because studies have shown that we're more likely to retain the lesson from a story we connect with than just a lot of facts. I know that it's true for me. And what I do at that point is I get them to buy into the idea that I'm talking about with, yes, okay, it makes sense that we need to fail a certain percentage of the time. Then I explain to them how that's true with improv like I did with you. And they're still saying, okay, I get that. And I say, good. Now it's your turn to try. And I turn the tables on them. And for about a third of the time I'm on stage, sometimes even a little bit more, I get them playing games out in the audience. There might be 200 people out there. That's 100 pairs of people playing these games. So it's really interactive. We do that for about 20 minutes or so. And then it comes back to me, and I recap and cover a few more thoughts. And then something that you probably don't see in most keynotes, sometimes I end the keynote with a song.
A song?
Yeah, a song.
Oh, come on, Milo. You're not really a singer, though, are you?
No, I'm actually not a singer. And sometimes I don't succeed. I tell them up front that that's part of the possibility. But I can carry a tune. And the reason the song is there is that it goes with a story of a time when I really did try to do my best that involved a song. And I couldn't hear myself well. And I failed. And how that affected me. And the words to the song are significant. So the fact that I'm willing to take a chance and once again try the song under circumstances where I can hear myself and can at least carry the tune. I have my A days and I have my B minus days, but they're rooting for me by the time I do it.
So you call it a keynote speech,
Yeah.
but there's a lot more going on than just speaking.
Right. I mean, we've got the storytelling at the beginning. We've got the interactive section. We've got me recapping, sometimes bringing people up on stage if I get a couple of really playful people, and then this closing about the song with the song. It's a very well-rounded experience.
So what sort of reaction do you get from the audience when you start involving them? I'm guessing that most of them don't see it coming.
No, not unless the meeting planner. Once in a while, I get a meeting planner who'll tell everybody, and you're going to be playing all these games. And if they do, that's fine. But sometimes people are a little surprised at first. And just like in the team building course, I warm them up. We start with a couple of very, very simple things so that by the time it gets a little more complicated, they're trusting me a little bit. So, no, they don't necessarily know what's coming. But I do get really nice response back. I had someone who walked up to me after one of the speeches and didn't even stop. She just walked close to me and mumbled, "Our meetings are always so boring. Thank you for coming." And then kept on walking as if she had never spoken to me. She didn't want anybody there to know that she was complaining that their meetings were normally on the dull side. I generally do an evaluation and I get really positive responses back from most people. Every now and then I do get one note from someone who said, "This wasn't my thing, that's not my cup of tea, I didn't really want to be active today." And you know what? Okay. I would rather that 95% of the people really had a great time and laughed and filled out wonderful evaluations, and that a couple of people here and there, it wasn't for them, because to bring a program that everyone is going to find acceptable probably means you're going to have to make it mediocre so that nobody is ever upset by anything. And that's not the kind of event I would want to hold. Next time we'll do something different for him, I guess. The thing I get a lot of the positive feedback on, though, that makes me feel good is the stories. That something in one of the stories, especially the final one with the song, that someone related to them and they said, "You know what? Something about that made me think, and I'm going to keep that in mind." And that's a wonderful feeling.
And where do all those stories you tell come from?
I just keep a list, and when something happens that I think is kind of funny, would make a good story, I jot it down. And I knew someday I would use them for something. I didn't know quite what. And somewhere along the way, they've found their ways into some of the keynotes. But someone said to me one time, you probably have more stories than you have keynotes. And it's true, I can only tell so many stories. Why don't you put them in a book? And I thought, a book? What a great idea. So I now have my book. It's called "Send in the Clowns is Not a Great Wedding March," based on a true story of a time when that song was played at a really inappropriate time and caused a whole lot of laughter.
Well, I can honestly say I've heard the stories in your book, and you know what? I found myself laughing out loud. They were great.
Oh, thank you.
Especially the ones about your grandparents.
My grandparents. There will never be another two people like Grandpa Harold and Grandma Florence. I wish that I had started writing about those two when I was 14 or something, because he was such a character, and she was just a nut. I mean, there's no way to describe Grandma Florence. And there's so many hysterical stories for the college years. I used to come back to my dorm, and the girls across the hall would say, "Okay, what did Grandma Florence do now?" And I wish I remembered all those stories, but I have captured a few of them in the book.
Now, independent of your one-man show, Milo, you also do a duo Kino program. Am I correct?
It's sometimes a duo. It's often a duo. It's sometimes a trio. It just depends on the situation.
Now, that's not even something I've ever heard before, and I've been to a lot of conferences.
Very few people have heard of it, yeah.
Are you saying that you split the time with another person?
No, it's really done as a duo or a trio.
I'm not even sure how to ask about that, so you tell me.
Okay.
What is the program?
What we do is, as a duo or sometimes as a trio, we create a list of 10 points that relate to the topic that client would find interesting. When we first started out, we had just one list. It was our 10 points on management and teamwork. And what we do is we do 10 improv games, and each one proves one of the points on the list. So what we're doing is we're using the entertainment value of improv to make the point in a really memorable way. And people will come up to us and say, I've heard that statement before. It's one of the things people always talk about, but I will never forget it because of the way you did it.
So would you give me an example of one of the points that you bring out in this keynote? Or should I call it a show?
I call it an entertainment keynote. I've struggled with what to call it also. I call it an entertainment keynote because it's definitely entertainment, but we really do make the points that we claim to through the improv work. It's just a more fun way to learn it.
Okay, so give me an example of how you use a game to make a point.
Oh, right, you asked that, sorry. Okay, one of the points we use in most of our lists, because it applies to so many different things that we do, whether we're doing a list on management and teamwork or sales or customer service, is this one. Quality results can't be rushed. I mean, that's a good business principle for anyone to go with. Quality results can't be rushed. So what we do for that point is we play a game called halftime. In the game of halftime, the 2 or 3 of us do a 1-minute scene based on an audience suggestion. Then we come back and we say, okay, that was a pretty good scene, but our manager just came along and said, you know what, you can't spend a whole minute on that scene. We're under the gun here. You need to shorten that and do it in only 30 seconds. So we replay the same scene, but only in 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then 8 seconds. Eventually, we're trying to do a 1-minute scene in 4 seconds, and it gets really funny to watch what little bits are left of it by the time you try and do a whole minute's worth of material in 4 seconds. And of course, we prove the point because the quality has gone downhill, so quality results can't be rushed. And that's just one of the games.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
It is.
So it's about you 2 or 3 performing games to make 10 points, right?
Right, although there is audience interaction in that one too. For a couple of the points, we either get somebody up and play with us. There's a game where an audience member has to move us. We can't move our own bodies, so they move us, and we have to deal with them micromanaging us. That's a point on micromanagement. There's a couple of different games where we get people up. And then there's always one game at least, sometimes 2, where we turn the tables on the audience and get them all playing a game. For instance, we might use that 3-word sentence game that you and I played earlier as a way of talking about working well within the limitations that you're given by your corporation. If there's certain limitations you have to work within, you can still reach a creative end even with those limitations on you.
Okay, here's our last topic, and I understand that you started doing some work with coaching and presentation skills. So tell me, how does that work?
I was teaching a private improv class. Every once in a while, people say to me, my company doesn't have any funding for this, or I'm a one-man company. Don't you ever give this out to the public? So once in a while, I'll do a public class. And someone approached me afterwards, and he told me that he sells product on QVC network, and he needed someone to work with him on being more flexible and better at working off the hostess. It's a very odd way of selling. You can't just keep giving your sales speech. You've got to play off of her. And we reviewed his tapes, and I showed him where he wasn't doing the building on the other person's idea, that yes and that I was talking about. So we started showing him ways that he could work more efficiently and more playfully with the hostess to get out what he wanted to say, but not cutting her off. I also showed him ways about, with his presentation skills, how he was building and building and building. He needed to come back down every once in a while so he could go back up again. Then, while I was working with him, someone else who had been in an audience of one of my speeches told his boss, hey, this guy is a good speaker. I bet he'd give a good course on presentation skills. And they called me up and asked if I would give a course on presentation skills, which was really a thrill to be asked. And I didn't have exactly the material yet, but I took some of the things that we do in team improvising that have to do with communication, tied in a whole bunch of other lessons that I've learned or taught myself along the way to be a professional speaker, and we created a course, and it went very well, and now they're bringing me back in a few months to do the next part of it. So I'm moving into working with people on their presentation skills.
Milo, we are just about out of time,
Okay.
so I want to thank you for joining me today. And listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Milo Shapiro's work with improvisation and perhaps enjoy some of those video clips of him and his colleagues doing improvisation, you can find him at www.improvevents.com, or how about just simply MiloShapiro.com.
That is easier for some
That's
people.
easier. Thanks again, Milo, for being with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
For Creative Voices, I'm Joni Wilson. Thanking you for listening, and I'll see you next time.